Christian art is the icon characteristic of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Now, the word icon comes from the Greek word ikon, meaning image or likeness. And contrary to what we often think, it's not merely a particular style of art that makes something an icon. It's also the subject it portrays, the way it's used, and the prayer that goes into its creation. Now, one subject of some of the great icons of Eastern Orthodoxy is Saint Panteleimon. He was born in the late 3rd century in what is now Turkey, and his name at birth was Pantaleon, which means in all things a lion. Pantaleon's father was pagan and his mother was Christian. Pantaleon's mother instructed him in the Christian way until she died, and at that time his father sent him to pagan schools where he was trained as a physician. He was even physician to the emperor. But one day a Christian priest reignited his curiosity in Christianity. When Pantaleon later came upon a child who lay dead in the street from the bite of a poisonous snake, Pantaleon prayed to God and promised that if the child was restored to life, then Pantaleon would be baptized. The child began to breathe again, the story goes, and Pantaleon went on to be baptized. The name he took at his baptism, though, was very different from the name that he was given at birth. At baptism, his name had been Pantaleon, a lion in all things, and he changed it to Panteleimon, which means all merciful. A lion in all things, and then all of a sudden, all merciful. Panteleimon lived up to his baptismal name, and he cared for those who were sick, suffering, needy, indigent. He even went into prisons and treated the wounds of those that were held captive. Because Panteleimon lived out the good news of the gospel in this way, icons of Saint Panteleimon remind us of the mercy and forgiveness that Jesus practiced during his life, a mercy and forgiveness that can heal and transform us. Unfortunately, Panteleimon himself did not live a long life. He was martyred at the age of 29. It seems that the emperor was more comfortable with the lion and everything, Pantaleon, than he was with the all-merciful Panteleimon. A struggle of force, like a lion, was something the emperor could understand and meet on its own terms. But the power of love and mercy changed the whole game and left him scared. Now, this isn't a new story in our Christian faith. In today's gospel from Luke, we see Jesus hanging on the cross at Golgotha. The soldiers cast lot for his clothes, and the leaders make fun of him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself if he's the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The inscription above him reads, "The King of the Jews." Even one of the criminals derides him, taunting him with, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." They all may have been making fun of Jesus, but deep down, the Roman government knew that a radical practice of love, mercy, and hospitality, even extending to those considered enemies, that would disrupt the status quo. They knew that love can overcome hate and intimidation and brute force. And Jesus practiced this way of love to the end. When the other criminal hanging next to him pleaded for Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom, Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." This picture of Jesus loving the world and those in it to the very end, this is who God is at the core. This is, in the words of the letter to the Colossians, the image or icon of the invisible God. And I think it's especially important for us to remember this image on this day of all days, the day when we celebrate Christ the King Sunday. At least when I hear the word king, I immediately think of power, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And power in the world that we live in typically means the ability to get what we want. It's usually connected to our ego, to our need to feel important and secure. But the nature of God redefines what power looks like. What we see as Jesus hangs on the cross is that true power is the ability to love perfectly, the ability to respond not out of ego, but out of God's desire for the world, out of God's love and mercy. What we see as Jesus hangs on the cross is that true power is the refusal to become the very things we seek to overcome. True power is the refusal to become the very things that we seek to overcome, the refusal to meet violence with more violence. What we see as Jesus hangs on the cross is that true power is the ability to respond to hate, intimidation, and violence with goodness, inclusivity, and love. I think it's hard for us to get our minds around this definition of power, even for us as Christians who worship a crucified Messiah. We look at all the Judeans in first century Palestine, all the ones who didn't recognize that Jesus was the Messiah, and we say, they didn't understand that the Messiah would come with compassion and love towards everyone, not as a great warrior. They didn't understand that Jesus would triumph, would save us, not by besting the world at its own games of power, but by changing the paradigm of power altogether. We say these things, and yet we ourselves often take those same false understandings of what the Messiah ought to look like. We take those same false understandings that people had about the first coming of Jesus, and we project them onto the second coming of Christ. We too often paint a picture of Jesus returning to the earth to give everybody what they deserve, to mete out rewards and punishment, and whip the world into shape. Maybe we still don't get it, if that's our view. And that's why, especially on Christ the King Sunday, we read this passage from Luke, a reminder that the power of the cross in all its vulnerability is what perfect power looks like. To the outside world, this kind of power may seem passive, but trust me, there is nothing weak or inadequate or unconvincing about it. In fact, this is the only kind of power that can transform the world. And that's why it scares so many people. No wonder Jesus was crucified, Pantaleon was beheaded, and Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi were both assassinated. Sharing the mercy and love of God can upend everything. Like Pantaleon, we are called to be icons of this kind of love and mercy. It's a vulnerable way to live, and it's a costly one. And it's natural to wonder at times if we even have it in us. Can we really be icons of that kind of love? Can we really step out of the kingdom of this world, a kingdom where we're expected to embody the power of a lion, and instead embody the kingdom of heaven, where God reigns in all the power that is love? Can we really do this? After all, aren't we just creatures of flesh and blood? Yes, we are just flesh and blood. But what the incarnation tells us, what we see in Jesus' life, is that flesh is fully capable of participating in God's power. Flesh is fully capable of being an icon of God's perfect love. And therefore, so too are we. And that's our challenge on Christ the King Sunday and our challenge every day.